Domestic violence is a public health issue. It does not only affect women, it affects men, children, and families. And domestic violence doesn't discriminate. It touches everyone, all classes, all races, and all age groups. In 2014, the National Network to End Domestic Violence surveyed 51 local domestic violence programs in Massachusetts. And in one day, 1,795 victims sought refuge, received counseling, obtained legal advice, or connected with children's support groups. But these numbers aren't even totally accurate. The fact is that most domestic violence incidents are never reported. The victims are afraid to report the abuse, or sometimes they don't even realize the severity of the abusive relationship. The Bristol County Commission on the Status of Women recognizes these fears and understands that domestic violence is a complicated public health issue. The Commission aims to provide education, resources, and hope to victims of domestic violence. They are the voice of Southcoast women.
Hello, and welcome to the Voice of Southcoast Women. I'm your host, Gail Forts, and thank you for watching our show, which is sponsored by the Bristol County Commission on the Status of Women. We have some great guests today that will speak about the issue about domestic violence in our community. Here's our first guest.
Hi, Gail. My name is Rebecca Arruda. I'm the Education Coordinator for the Women's Center. The Women's Center is the domestic violence sexual assault agency serving the South Coast for the past 42 years. The Women's Center offers free and confidential services for victims around counseling, support groups, medical advocacy, legal advocacy, shelter, and prevention and education. Our medical advocacy program is if anyone goes to the hospital, specifically St. Luke's, we will respond to victims of domestic violence and help them while they're in the hospital to find a safe place.
Hi, I'm Diana Williams. I'm a commissioner on the Bristol County Commission for the Status of Women. Our mission is to provide a permanent and effective voice for women across Bristol County that'll foster and facilitate community and inclusiveness among women. We stand for basic freedoms, basic rights and equality, and we do that by meeting with women across Bristol County, meeting with different legislators at the State House, and also trying to educate women and families, particularly students in the area.
Thank you, Diana.
Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Bendiksen. I currently serve as the Executive Assistant to Bristol County District Attorney Tom Quinn. The Bristol County District Attorney's Office is charged with prosecuting all crimes that happen in Bristol County, which includes 20 cities and towns. A lot of our work does focus on domestic violence. I would say the bulk of our cases in district court are related to incidents of domestic violence in the home. And I've also held several capacities at this office. I formerly worked as a victim witness advocate working with crime victims. And personally, in my after hours, I also do a lot of survivor speaking. I was myself a victim when I was young in college, and that kind of led me down a path of doing a lot of advocacy and speaking on behalf of victims. I worked at the Women's Center alongside Rebecca for a little while, so I've done a lot of education and outreach work as well.
Thank you, Ashley.
Hi, I'm Juli Parker. I'm the Assistant Dean of Students and Director of the Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality at UMASS, Dartmouth. The Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality is actually the second oldest women's center in the country on a college campus. We were founded in 1970 as a problem pregnancy birth control referral center before Roe v. Wade was legalized in this country. I'm primarily responsible for all of our prevention and education outreach at UMass Dartmouth around dating violence, sexual violence, domestic violence. We have a $300,000 Violence Against Women grant from the Department of Justice that we've hired a victim advocate with that grant, along with using those monies to do mandatory first-year education around sexual violence. And my work, similar to Ashley's, comes out of a personal experience with domestic violence. When I was young, when I was 19, I was married to someone who was abusive, and that path also led me to become the feminist activist that I am today.
Well, thank you, Julie. Well, we have a great panel today to talk about an issue that affects all of us in our community. So what is domestic violence? Rebecca, what is the definition of that?
I think, to put it in simplest terms, that it is about power and control between intimate partners. So we really changed the definition, straying away from the idea that it's just between a male and a female in the family, that it can be between same-sex partners and dating partners, teens, adults, elderly. So that's why we've expanded it to intimate partners. And this is done through manipulation and coercion across all different forms of violence.
And it's important to note it's not just physical violence. There's mental, emotional, financial, exerting control over, every aspect of somebody's life. So it really covers, a broad spectrum of actions.
Absolutely, and Rebecca was talking about it happening in dating relationships, excuse me, and like amongst teens, and I've done a lot of public speaking in the schools as well as Rebecca, and a lot of it is the emotional and psychological abuse, and especially today with technology, you might have a boyfriend who calls you 100 times a day, won't stop texting you, they go on your Facebook, they're finding out where you are, showing up when you're at your friends' parties, so all of that can constitute domestic violence as well.
Going back to control and technology, also checking up on the partner through Facebook and trying to read their text messages, all different ways that they can control the actions of their partner.
Absolutely.
So what are some statistics on domestic violence? You hear, different things about how many women actually report this or are going to court. So are there any stats that any of you would like to share?
On a nationwide level, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence commented that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men experience some form of physical violence.
And it's important to note there are a lot of cases that aren't reported, so I'm sure the number is much higher than that.
So let's walk through the process. If someone comes in, as an example, to the Women's Center or to the DA's office or to the Student Center at UMASS Dartmouth or to your office, Diana, what would be the first step if they're reporting something?
If we're going to start from the Women's Center aspect, we're really about support and advocacy. So that's, we'll really outline the options for the victim. And if they wanted to report it, that's really where we collaborate with other agencies such as the DA's office or the local police. We would offer the option of a restraining order, which we could work with them at the courts in filling out a restraining order and what different safety planning options they could have, as well as, I don't think I mentioned it in our intro, but we do have 3 shelters in the Southcoast area, and one focuses specifically with dual diagnosis women, and where I believe 1 in 3 in Massachusetts that focuses on mental health, domestic violence, sexual assault, and substance abuse. So that might be something that we're advocating with them. But we're really about support and counseling and education so that they can choose a better path in life.
Okay, thank you. Anything to add, anyone, to that?
I think at the university things are a little different now than they probably were 5 or so years ago because of Title IX. So now universities have strict guidelines that came out in 2011 from the Department of Education's Dear Colleague letter. Universities are required now to investigate any complaints of dating, domestic violence, sexual assault. So what my office is able to do is, because we do have a victim advocate who's a confidential person, there are 4 locations on campus where students can report where they're not, where the staff person doesn't have to report up to the Title IX investigator. But now if they go talk to their faculty member or they talk to a staff person, they actually have to give names and information up to the Title IX investigator to investigate the situation, which could end up coming into a student conduct sanction. For example, in our student code of conduct, obviously hitting someone or hurting someone is a violation of our student code of conduct. So students could get anywhere from, a warning to actually get expelled from the university. My office, of course, does more like the Women's Center in terms of doing the advocacy, making sure the student is getting the counseling that they need, making sure that that we can set up moving their location out of their residence hall, possibly rearranging their course schedule so that they don't have to run into the abuser. So whatever we can do to make sure that the student is having a positive experience within the institution during something traumatic like that.
Okay, thank you. What about from the legal perspective?
Well, I'm sure the DA's office has a lot they can add, but if someone were to come to me, informing me of domestic violence in their life, I would refer them to the police department, the DA's office, and we'd also help them get an abuse prevention order as soon as possible so that they can, make sure them and if they have any children are safe.
So working for the district attorney's office, I mentioned I worked in court, so I did I often was the first person that these victims were coming into. It's a little bit different only because at your locations, maybe the victims are coming in to seek help. A lot of times our victims are coming in because they are immediately responding to the police arresting their boyfriend or arresting their husband. And that kind of puts us in a position where we see two kinds of victims. Some victims come in and they want to fully prosecute and hold their partner accountable for their actions and move forward and get the supports. And we usually refer our victims out to the Women's Center. We also have courthouses in Taunton, Fall River, and Attleboro, so we also refer to STAR in Fall River as well as New Hope, which is the Taunton-Attleboro Resource Agency for Victims, and we will do everything that we can. We have our victim witness advocates who work with these victims, provide them referrals, provide them support and advocacy. We assist them through the entire trial process. That includes writing a victim impact statement. We do try to take into account what the victim wants to happen in these cases. A lot of times the victim knows the abuser best, and they might say, if he was in drug and alcohol counseling or if he went through a batterers intervention program, he could probably get help, whereas that would be a better alternative than putting someone in jail. If someone is a repeat offender and they have a history of domestic violence cases against them, we hope that the victim will work with us and that we can keep that person on board, go through the trial process, and if appropriate, give jail time to the offender. Sometimes, however, we get victims who come in who recant their statements to the police, who don't want to see the case move forward, and that's very challenging. But there's so many reasons that victims don't want to report the abuse. Perhaps they're scared and they call the police and the police arrest their boyfriend or their husband out of the home. But then by the time the court date comes in, they say the police made this up, or that's not what really happened, or I was partly at fault as well. So that's a whole nother challenge that we face at the DA's office.
Right. Well, so you bring up a good point, Ashley. You hear a lot of times, well, why did she stay? Or why did she go back? And we all know here that there is a lot of barriers and challenges for mostly women, because it is mostly women that are affected in their families for doing this. But what are some of the stereotypes that you hear, and what are some of the reasons that a person would stay in this type of a relationship, or why would they go back and change their minds and not press charges? Or what are some of the reasons that they cannot move past this relationship?
I think one of the biggest issues is economic insecurity. So many women are tied economically to their partners. And I think many of us probably had mothers at some point in our lives who said, make sure you have your own account, and I think even today, still, I know lots of young people who never even think that that's an important thing, that you have your own account and your own money. So I think economic insecurity, I think, is one of the biggest barriers. I was going to say even down to traditional beliefs of having a united family. So, economic stability is definitely one of them, but also, believing that children should grow up with a mother and father in the home. So by separating that dynamic, then you're actually putting the children at a worse situation, is kind of that belief or that myth that some victims have, as well as, if culture comes into play. When we do a lot of work with the Latino population, and a lot of that is education around what a healthy relationship looks like, because they have a belief, or different cultural backgrounds has the belief that men should be the providers, or men should be masculine, and with masculinity that might mean showing power and force or physical force, making all the decisions, really being the leader of the home, where the woman becomes only the maternal person, the person cooking and cleaning. So we do a lot of work around changing cultural beliefs to say, healthy relationships do look different, and it's okay to seek help and to leave and to, I want to say demand, but ask for something different in your relationships.
Okay, thank you.
And
wanna
just
add something,
going back
Ashley?
to what Julie was saying, a lot of the victims that I saw while working in court, a lot of them did have children and they did have families. And one of their greatest concerns was, he pays the bills, he pays the rent, I will have nothing if he goes to jail. And so that's a big reason that they recant and say that it wasn't that bad, and they just want him back at home. So I can agree with that.
And another, just to add to what everyone's saying, another fear that they might have is that, this abuser is going to, come back and it's going to be worse for them. If they do try to do something about it, maybe he won't go to jail, maybe he'll come back and find them. So, it makes people nervous to, try to reach out.
Right. And there's so many excuses, too, that victims sometimes create in their minds. I mean, if there is alcohol and drugs involved, they might say, well, it's only because he was drunk, or, it's only because he just lost his job. So there's a lot of reasons that victims think it's a one-time isolated incident, it's not going to happen again, or they believe they can manage it, or they're working on things. So that's another reason that they don't want to move forward as well. And I'm sure Rebecca can attest to, if a woman does want to leave and she has nothing and she needs to go into shelter and get job assistance, that is a huge, overwhelming process too, which a lot of women just don't want to go through.
I was going to say, I think it's a lot of times when victims come into our agency, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and there's various different reasons why a person stays. But fear is a huge one, whether that's fear, like you explained, what's the retaliation by the abuser, but fear of the unknown, like Ashley's speaking of, not knowing what shelter looks like, not knowing what that process is going to be like, and then fear of being alone. They're so codependent on their abuser, so if they're leaving this abusive relationship and they have no other supports, a lot of times abusers isolate the victim. So if they have no other supports, it's this fear of, is the grass going to be greener on the other side?
Right, sure, absolutely, definitely. So there's always people that say, too, there's so many stereotypes out there that, well, how did she get in this relationship? I mean, we all know that it doesn't start out day one with this type of a relationship, whether it's physical violence or other types of violence. What types of things, as someone's friend or co-worker or parent, or how can you help someone that may be going through this, or they might not even realize that they're going through this? What are some types of signs or things that you could be looking for, even for yourself, that if you might be in a relationship that could be coming down the road to be a domestic violence relationship?
I think it starts out small, exerting control in little things, what someone can wear, what they can eat, what money they can spend, they can see. I think a big part of it is isolating the victim from, her friends and family, other people that might be able to see what's going on and, talk to her about it. So I think that's a big first step, and, it gets gradually, worse and worse.
Right, and I mean, it's super common. I mean, we've all known somebody who's been in a relationship where it's just controlling and they're with somebody that doesn't give them their independence or their freedom. So I think it's paying attention to that and not always just labeling physical violence as domestic violence. Domestic abuse is excessive control in a relationship. So just being that outside point of view and noticing that that's starting to occur is the first step to helping someone. Do you want to add to that?
Well, I guess I would say that there's certainly there's signs too of people who are the type of person who are power and control people, so manipulators. So I think like my ex-husband was somebody who could kind of like cry when he wanted to, so there was certainly this kind of tug at your heartstrings approach, like, oh, I'll never do that again, I'm so sorry, and I think women can not all women certainly, but I think women can fall for a crying man pretty easily sometimes. Oh, the poor thing.
We think we can change people.
We think we can change people. We think we can fix them. I think I've read some stuff around the way that abusers treat animals, treat their mother. You know, I think there's connections between that as well. I think that some abusers, like my ex-husband, was someone who really bought into gender roles, right? So like it was my job to do all of the female chores in the household, and so I think that those are just some signs that, of course, for me looking back, you don't necessarily see them at the time, but I think later on you're like, oh, those are some real clues that I should have paid attention to.
Sure.
Absolutely. And like going back to what you were saying about like what can a friend do? So I get this question a lot from students when I speak. Or they'll come up to me with their frustration, like, oh, you know, my friend has been dating this guy for months and I keep telling her to leave him and she won't, and I'm just all set with her. And it is inherently frustrating when you're trying to tell someone to leave and they don't, but we need to understand that that is a process. I mean, it's hard to leave even a good relationship sometimes. I mean, you develop a friendship, a partnership, a life with somebody. So it does take a process, and I don't know what the statistic is, but it's something like an average of like 9 attempts to leave before 7 attempts to leave. And it's true, and I think of my relationship and how many times I thought about leaving and I almost left but just couldn't. And so my advice is always just to stay present, even if you are, as a friend, kind of isolated from that person, just them knowing that when that day comes and they're ready to leave, that they can pick up the phone and call you is just a huge comfort. Because I know when I was ready, I really didn't know who to call because everybody had distanced themselves from me. So I had just myself to rely on. But if you know you have that one friend that you can always just pick up the phone and call them and they'll be understanding, that's a huge support to somebody who's ready to leave the abuse.
I was going to say patience too, kind of adding to that is like being patient, because it does, you know, it is a process. So knowing that, you know, your friend might not leave the first chance, or they might not say, oh, I agree with everything you're saying, and say, I'm going to end this relationship today. So having patience that it is a process. And also that letting them know resources. You know, I've been living in the community my whole life, and I actually did not know that the Women's Center was available and what it did, or any of these agencies, you know, until I started doing the work. So
And free services. I mean, the services are free. Free counseling, free everything.
Yeah, so I think if you feel like you can't actually put yourself in that place with your friend to help them leave, give them supports or other options so that they can have other supports to help them when they're ready. And you were also mentioning signs. You had asked about signs, and I was thinking, you know, one of the key things in the definition of domestic violence is the cycle. So something to look for is that cycle that persists in a domestic violence relationship where, you know, it starts out all good, right? And I'm sure you can attest to this, where it starts out really good. We call it the honeymoon phase. This person seems perfect. Everything in life seems really well. And you start to see these controlling behaviors like you were mentioning, the isolation, the jealousy, the put downs, and then there's a bad incident. And that's not always physical. That could be a really bad fight. That could be breaking up. And then the abuser apologizes. And that's just a constant cycle.
Happening over and over again. So we have seen, especially in this past year, so many different things in the media. The case with Rihanna and Chris Brown, different things with NFL players and the responses to those incidences. And, you know, we all are seeing these all of the time. Young girls are seeing these, young boys are seeing this as well. So what can we tell people when they see this and they see a famous person and now they got married and everything is supposedly beautiful and wonderful and the legal aspect is dropped, or, you know, they just keep playing football, or they just go on with, as Rihanna or Chris Brown, making concerts and doing all of these wonderful things. So how do we get the message out that it doesn't matter who it is? How can we, you know, get people to understand that piece of it?
I think that's a major problem, especially with the NFL. You know, so many people, including, you know, young men and women, look up to these people, and, you know, to see, you know, an NFL player do something terrible, you know, one was even caught on video, and then not get, you know, a punishment that fits the crime, it's really frustrating, and, it kind of downplays the seriousness of the problem. There's a lot of people in the NFL who are getting much harsher punishments for, possessing marijuana or, I guess, allegedly deflating footballs than for, beating their pregnant wife. And it's really sad.
Well, and I feel like there's still the persistent question of like, well, what did she do? Or, what preceded him knocking her out in the elevator?
Right. Exactly.
Which is unfortunate because it just places this stigma that, domestic violence is a mutual issue between, in a relationship, which we shouldn't get involved in. However, it's not. I mean, it's a crime from my perspective.
And that inquiry itself, what happened before this? What did she do?
Right.
I mean, that's the problem. I mean, that plays into the, she had it coming mindset, which, really isn't right. And, we need to teach the youth that, this is not okay.
Right.
And I don't know the exact numbers, but going back to the Chris Brown Rihanna case, there was some Boston study of like 200 youth, and it was something like 50% of them blamed both Rihanna and Chris Brown equally, and like 48% blamed Rihanna. So even among teens, they think, well, she must have done something, or there must have been an argument. But it just blows my mind that they're accepting the physical response as appropriate. I mean, arguments happen, but when the physical aspect comes in, that's when you have to kind of say, like, okay, someone was wrong in this relationship.
Right. So what can we do as a community? I mean, we want everyone to know that domestic violence is not just a women's issue. It's a community issue. It's a nationwide issue for our families. But for people, like you said, before, that are living in these relationships, their children are witnessing these relationships. So for them, that is a healthy relationship. That's all they know. So we want to make sure that we can change the message. I know we've worked with a lot of women that have experienced that, and they have said that, what can I teach my son so that he doesn't think that this is acceptable, because he's witnessing this, he's seeing this, so to him this is normal. I don't want him to do that to his partner someday. So what is the message for prevention, education, outreach that we can give to everyone, because it is a community-wide issue?
Well, I think knowledge is power. I think it's really important to teach people, especially young people in school, that it's not okay, and give them the signs to look for, and then also, maybe most importantly, let them know that there are resources. Let them know, there are shelters available. They can go to the DA's office and talk to somebody. There are places that they can go, just so they don't feel like they, have no options and they have to stay there.
And
I think also focusing on the positive, we do maybe focus on what domestic violence is, but we don't really talk too much about what a healthy relationship really looks like. And I think as adults, we need to model that. So I think that's one way parents and adults can get involved, is to educate them on what healthy is, but also model that so that they can see the positive perspective of it. And then I know Julie can talk a little bit more about this, but we also do a lot around, just having more discussion and the bystander focus that we all have to take action to ending domestic violence. At UMass Dartmouth, one of the big education and prevention pushes that we have is the bystander intervention model that's become very popular at a lot of universities. There's many different models of that. Green Dot, for example, is a very popular nationwide model around bystander intervention. Green Dot specifically really focuses on sexual assault. We use a program that is a kind of a hybrid called ABC. It's Active Bystanders Care. Falls under our Corsairs Care model, where we're actually, Corsairs Care is really about students intervening in any situation. So if you think someone's suicidal, if you think someone's being hurt, if you think somebody's had too much to drink and needs to go to the hospital, so that we're calling on each other to recognize that it's our responsibility to make our community a better community. 3 of the tools that we teach students around bystander intervention around domestic and dating violence is the 3 Ds. So distract, delegate, I'm going to forget the last D. Distract, delegate, direct, thank you. So the idea is that, you're not comfortable going up to, a man who seems to be kind of hassling a woman. So you could say, to their friend, oh, I know you know him, do you think you could say something to him? So that would be the delegation. Direct, of course, would be like, hey, what are you doing? This is not appropriate, or I'm not comfortable with what's happening here. And then distract is like, someone's towing your car, so that the whole situation kind of breaks up. So we do workshops with students on this model and try to get them to come up with their own ideas, so that they can kind of think on their feet when they're in a situation where they really feel like something doesn't feel right. And really to trust your gut, right? Because we were all young once and went to parties and had situations where we were like, I don't know if this is good that's happening, what's happening there. But often felt like it's not my role to intervene. So we're trying to put it back on students and say it is your role to intervene, and it's okay to do that. We also have a medical amnesty policy at UMass Dartmouth, so if Ashley's had too much to drink and I've been drinking too, and I call to get her help, neither one of us will get in trouble.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. That's good information to know. So before we wrap up, I just want to talk a little bit about the new law, Ashley, about domestic violence in the workplace, if you could.
Okay, sure. So I'll be quick.
Address that.
It's pretty brief information, but another reason a lot of victims don't want to come forward is because the court process can be very time consuming, and they're afraid that they're going to lose their jobs. So last year, Massachusetts passed several domestic violence laws, one of them which requires anyone with 50 or more employees to provide them with up to 15 days of leave without any recourse, so they won't lose their job. It could be if you yourself are a victim, or even if a family member that's close to you is a victim. The employers do kind of make their own determinations as to whether you have to use your own sick time, personal time, vacation time first. However, if you take up to 15 days off to go through the court process, to go to get restraining order renewals and all of that, there should be no recourse from your employer. And if you do find any pushback, the Attorney General's office has a whole process on their website where you can file a complaint. So that kind of is one extra protection for victims today as well, which is awesome.
Thank you, Ashley. That's great.
Adding to that too, for the new laws is also for housing laws as well that protect victims through not losing housing.
So final thoughts, any final words, what we can do as a community to help, any advocacy we can do to help people in our community that are facing these challenges right now?
I'd just like to say that violence is preventable, that we all have to take action by talking about it. I think the Women's Center is known for their services once an incident happens, but you can come to the Women's Center if you are still in a relationship and you just want counseling or safety planning while in the relationship, as well as, we do have an education program. So if you need information as a parent, how to talk to your children, if you need professional development training, or work in the schools is something that we also do. We are available as a resource just on how to have these conversations.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any final thoughts?
I agree. I think just talking about it, and I know I do a lot of public speaking, like I said, and it's amazing after every time I speak, people come up and it's like, hey, we dated the same person, or I'm going through this right now, or my best friend. It's so much more prominent than we realize. So I think once we start talking about it and get rid of just the shame and the embarrassment, we can really start to make some real change.
Yeah, and another point is just to, make people accountable, with the social media, pulp culture, celebrities, the NFL, people who are public figures, make sure they don't get away with, brushing things under the rug. Make sure that, young persons know that it's not okay, and, it should not be treated that way.
Actually, the Misrepresentation Project, called the Representation Project, has a hashtag during the Super Bowl, where they call out ads that do not promote women in a positive way. Not buying it, I think is what it's called. So that organization has some great tools, I think, for addressing issues in social media.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all for being on our show today. Their information will be at the end of the show during the credits. So thank you for watching Voice of Southcoast Women. Next month's episode will feature women's health. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Gail.
Thanks, Gail.